EVs may be the future, but could they still have a catastrophic impact by causing the collapse of large car makers like VW?
Yes, but that is largely self-made or self-created. The difference here is when a new technology comes along. Let's take smartphones as an example. It's one I often quote. There was no compulsion to buy smartphones. Smartphones came on the market. Before that, we had mobile phones. And when smartphones came on the market, it was an alternative. You could or you couldn't buy a smartphone. It doesn't matter. You buy one, it was different, it was better, it did more, it was more expensive, and it was an alternative. And that's fine. And that's what happens with most technologies. When first flat screen TVs came on the market, you had a choice. You could carry on buying a CRT or you could buy a flat screen. You had a choice, and choice is always good. The difference with the arrival of the EV was that with it came this absolutely massive, colossal backlash against it. And it was funded and driven by the existing technology, the oil and gas and oil giants, and the existing legacy auto giants of the time, the petrol and the diesel. And they decided they were going to destroy the EVs because they saw it as a threat to the industry. And they did everything in their power to try and destroy the EV industry. So rather than seeing whether EVs would sink or swim on their own merits, there was this massive campaign against it, and it very nearly failed. Unfortunately for them, there's some really nice cars came on the market and enough people bought them that it actually survived on its own merits, and then it started getting a bit of a foothold. In the meantime, the oil and gas giants and the legacy spent a huge amount of money trying to fight against it. So when eventually governments realised that they were the answer to all the pollution problems and the CO2 and the net zero 2050 and everything else, that these were really clean technology, and they started making them compulsory, the legacy auto had already shot themselves in the foot. Nobody wanted them, or not enough people wanted them. So when they were forced to actually start making EVs, they found that their existing customers didn't actually want them because they'd been put off them. So they spent a huge amount of money making their own EVs, but they didn't want to make them really good because that would detract from their own ICE cars, which was where they got their profit from. So they made half-hearted attempts, which again, their customers then rejected. And so the ICE industry, the legacy auto, actually made half-hearted cars, which their customers now didn't want because they'd been told they were really bad, and that part of the market failed. They were hoping that at that point EV cars would fail totally, but they haven't. And now they've reached a point where they've spent a huge amount of money on starting the EV industry, which has failed, and now they have to get it going again. And they've spent a massive amount of money, and they are running desperately short of money, and they are now having to spend a huge amount of time, effort, and money convincing their customers that actually EVs are actually quite good. We're having to make them. They're really quite good now, and they are in a desperate race to see whether they can survive. So unfortunately, the answer to your question is yes, they probably won't survive, many of them, because they actively fought against it, spent a huge amount of money, time, and effort fighting against it, and they were very successful fighting against it, but they failed. And that failure is likely to cause some of them to fail to be able to recover and become EV manufacturers in the future.
Next up, so if EVs are so good, as people regular to the channel will have heard you saying, why do they need subsidies?
A simple answer is they don't. They shouldn't have any. And in fact, in the UK, they've never had any. They don't get any subsidies. At least they don't get any subsidies that ICE cars don't get. The only subsidies in the UK available to EVs are also available to ICE cars, and these are benefit in kind for salary sacrifice, for example. And those are available to ICE cars as well. just in slightly different sums. And the only other benefit they got was, until recently, zero road tax or vehicle excise duty, which is a pretty trivial sum anyhow. So there have been no subsidies, but they didn't need any. And had the legacy auto industry not fought so violently against EVs, tried to destroy them, they would have been left on their own to sink or swim, and they would have sunk or swim on their own without any subsidies, without the need for the government to do anything. So it was just a simple case of, because there was a big movement to try and stop EVs, that when they didn't grow as fast as the government thought they were going to, they needed to step in and started doing things like zero vehicle excise duty and subsidising the EV charging infrastructure that actually became necessary. So you've got your answer is that had people not fought hard against them, there wouldn't have been any need whatsoever for any subsidies or assistance at all.
Do EVs need servicing?
It comes down to definition of servicing, and servicing, we have a difference of opinion on this, some of the viewers and me. Servicing, to me, is something preventative to stop something from failing prematurely. So, for example, if you have a bearing in a petrol engine and it has an oil supply, if you don't replace the oil on a regular basis, that oil will wear thin and the bearing will wear out prematurely, and that will fail and the engine will be destroyed. And therefore, replacing the oil is a serviceable item. It's designed to stop something failing prematurely. You don't have that on the electric car. There's no oil, there's no bearings as such. There's nothing you can do to an electric motor that will prevent it failing prematurely. There are things that will wear out, but there are things that you can't stop wearing out. For example, windscreen wiper blades. There's nothing you can do to prolong the life of those. So they will fail in time, they will wear out, and when they wear out, you replace them. So I distinguish between things wearing out and replacing them and servicing. So there's nothing really serviceable on an EV. But there are things you will need to replace. That's tyres, windscreen wipers, screen wash. Brake fluid does wear away over time. It becomes hygroscopic. It absorbs water and becomes less effective. Conditioning fluid, gas, that leaks away over time. But there's nothing you can do to stop it, so you just leave it until it reaches a certain stage and then you replace it. So servicing, no. There will be things you will replace at certain intervals, yes, but they're minimal things. This car, for example, has never had a service as such. I have had the conditioning gas topped up on one occasion in its 9-year life. I've had no oil changes because there's no oil in it, but no bearing changes. I have had suspension components replaced when they wore out. I've had wiper blades replaced, obviously screen wash. The brake pads are still the original, brake discs are still the original. It's minimal on an EV.
Continuing on from servicing or maintenance of EVs, will EVs put garages out of business?
Yes. There is no doubt that you will not require as many what I call the small garages, who at the moment do servicing, oil changes, brake changes, exhaust changes, clutch, gearbox, cylinder head gaskets, that sort of thing, because none of that will be required for an EV. However, the idea that these are going to be out of a job next week or next year is just ridiculous. We have about 30 million cars in the UK, and of those, 29 million are petrol and diesel. We sell around about 2 million cars a year, new cars a year. of which only about 20% are EVs. So probably 500,000 EVs a year go on the road, and at that rate it's going to take 50 or 60 years for all of the petrol and diesel cars to be replaced. It's not going to be that long. In reality, it's going to be much shorter. But for the next 5, 10, 20 years, these small garages are going to be much in demand. It's not going to change. And then as people who like their ICE cars don't want to move into an EV, they will hang on to them for longer. And that means that they will have older and older cars, and they will require more and more maintenance to keep them on the road. So in fact, these little backstreet garages will become more in demand. So for the next 10 or 20 years, absolutely no risk. But then over time, they will slowly start to disappear. But by then, a lot of these people, my local garage who looks after my car, he's probably about my age. He's about due for retirement. The lads working for him are probably in their 30s and 40s. They'll probably be retired by then. It's not something to worry about at the moment.
Well, that brings us to the end of our rainy day adventures. I hope that you have all enjoyed us addressing some of these EV myths, these concerns, these fears that people have around it, and hopefully it's put your mind at ease. And of course, as ever, if you vehemently disagree with everything that's been said, let us know where we've gone wrong. I'm Jonas.
I'm Dave.
Thank you for watching.